Detention Block 7 had all the charm of a medical waste disposal unit, which was fitting since that's essentially what it had become. Commander Vex-High of the Korathian hegemony stood before Cell 247C with the resigned expression of someone who'd discovered that conquering civilizations involved significantly more paperwork than the recruitment hollows had suggested. The quarterly inspection forms weren't going to file themselves, and unfortunately, neither were the prisoners going to inspect themselves. Status report on the human female, Vex-High commanded, his 4 arms cycling through the tablet interfaces with practiced bureaucratic efficiency. Lieutenant Zekmo, whose species had evolved specifically to excel at middle management, consulted his datapad with the reverence typically reserved for holy texts. Subject designation: Maintenance Specialist 7739, captured during the final sweep of Settlement Gamma, no formal military training on record, assigned to technical repair duties since integration. And the armor? The question hung in the recycled air like a particularly awkward silence at a diplomatic dinner. The human in question had been wearing the same cobbled-together assembly of metal plates and polymer strips for approximately 4 months. It wasn't exactly regulation prisoner attire, but then again, humans had proven remarkably creative when it came to ignoring regulations. She requested materials for protective gear, citing workplace safety concerns, Zekmo explained, with the tone of someone who'd spent considerable time trying to explain human logic to beings who possessed actual logic. Medical determined it posed no security risk. Over 97% of viewers here are watching without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button right now and join the journey. Every click helps us grow stronger, and you'll never miss the next epic story. Vex-High studied the figure through the transparent barrier. The human sat cross-legged on her sleeping platform, methodically adjusting what appeared to be a shoulder guard fashioned from a ventilation grate. Her movements carried the deliberate precision of someone who understood that the difference between functional and decorative could mean the difference between breathing and not breathing. Workplace safety, Vex-High repeated, savoring the phrase like a particularly bitter stim drink. During detention. The repair facilities can be hazardous, offered Technician Ryal from his position near the door. As a member of the notoriously cautious Valdorian species, Ryal had approximately 17 different protocols for safely approaching a food dispenser. Exposed conduits, chemical leaks, structural instabilities, all of which existed before we arrived, Vex-High noted. Did humans simply accept grievous injury as an occupational hazard? Evidence suggests yes, Zekmo confirmed. Their safety standards appear to have been more aspirational than practical. The human looked up as if she'd heard them, which was impossible given the sound dampening. But humans had an unnerving tendency to behave as if they possessed senses they shouldn't technically possess. Her eyes met Vex-High's through the barrier, and she offered what might have been a smile or possibly a grimace. With humans, the distinction often proved academic. Vex-High activated the communication panel. Prisoner 7739, you will remove the improvised protective equipment for inspection. Any particular reason? Her voice carried the flat, professional tone of someone who'd asked that question before and learned to expect disappointing answers. Routine health and safety compliance verification, Vex-High replied, which was true in the same way that describing a supernova as a minor stellar event was technically accurate. The human stood with fluid efficiency, her movements unencumbered by the makeshift armor despite its obvious weight. Understood. Give me a moment to unlatch everything. What followed was perhaps the most methodical disrobing in the history of detention facilities. Each piece of armor came off with deliberate care, revealed fastenings that shouldn't have been possible given the available materials, strips of polymer that had been heated and formed into custom joints, metal plates that showed evidence of precise hammering to achieve optimal fit. It was engineering improvisation elevated to an art form. "How did she accomplish this level of modification?" Raal whispered, his voice carrying the reverence typically reserved for master craftsmen. "Tool access is strictly regulated," Zekmo noted, consulting his tablet. "She's authorized for basic repair implements during work assignments." "Basic repair implements don't achieve this precision," Vexhai observed. The human continued her systematic undressing, each removed piece revealing more of what lay beneath. And what lay beneath made Vexhai's diplomatic training collide headlong with his xenobiological education. Her torso was a roadmap of deliberate scarification. Not random cuts or defensive wounds, but precise, intentional marks that followed anatomical lines with surgical precision. Geometric patterns interlaced with what appeared to be symbolic notation. Some scars showed the silvered evidence of age, others retained the darker hues of more recent origin. "Medical," Zekmo breathed, his usual bureaucratic composure cracking like cheap hull plating. "Did we do this?" That was the question, wasn't it? The Carathian hegemony prided itself on civilized integration protocols. Torture was inefficient, barbaric, and most importantly, generated negative performance metrics on quarterly evaluations. But the alternative explanation, that someone had done this to themselves, challenged several fundamental assumptions about sentient behavior. "Prisoner 7739, Vexhai said carefully. "Explain the nature of those markings." The human had finished removing her armor and stood before them in standard detention garments, the scars visible through the thin fabric. She glanced down at herself, as if just remembering they existed. "Which ones?" she asked. "The technical specifications, the procedural, reminders, or the commemorative work?" The silence that followed could have been bottled and sold as a conversation stopper. "You're saying you created those deliberately?" Ral's voice climbed several octaves, approaching frequencies typically associated with atmospheric breach alarms. "Of course." She said it with the same matter-of-fact tone she might use to confirm the color of the walls. "Standard practice for long-term technical assignments. Can't exactly carry reference manuals when your hands are full of live electrical conduits." Vexhai felt something that might have been a headache forming, despite the fact that his species didn't technically experience headaches. Humans had a remarkable ability to induce phantom physiological responses in beings who thought they understood the limits of stress. "You used your own body as documentation?" "Among other things." The human rolled her shoulder, causing a particularly intricate pattern of scars to shift like living circuitry. 3 years is a long time to maintain infrastructure without proper technical support. You adapt. Lieutenant Zekmo was frantically updating his tablet, stylus moving with the desperate energy of someone trying to categorize the uncategorizable. "This requires immediate xenopsychological consultation, and probably medical evaluation, and definitely security review." "Why security review?" Vexhai asked, though he suspected he wasn't going to enjoy the answer. "Because," Zekmo said slowly, "if she's been using her body to store technical information for 3 years, we need to determine exactly what kind of information she's been storing." The human's expression might have been amusement, though with the scars creating new topographies across her features, emotional interpretation became considerably more complex. "That," she said quietly, "is probably a very good question." Vexhai stared at the human, at her methodically arranged armor, at the scars that transformed her skin into something resembling a technical schematic drawn by someone with a particularly dark sense of humor. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear the sound of his perfectly organized quarterly inspection, dissolving into what promised to be a very long series of very uncomfortable meetings. The worst part was the growing suspicion that this was exactly what she'd intended. Interrogation Chamber 3 possessed the aesthetic appeal of a surgical suite designed by someone who'd only heard surgery described secondhand. The walls gleamed with that particular shade of white that suggested either pristine cleanliness or the complete absence of imagination. Vexahai had relocated the interview here partially for the enhanced recording capabilities, but primarily because watching someone calmly discuss self-mutilation in a cell felt inappropriate for reasons he couldn't adequately articulate. The human sat across from him at the regulation interview table, her hands folded with the patience of someone accustomed to waiting for complex systems to boot up. Dr. Thessarian, the facility's chief medical officer, had joined them along with security analyst Cortmex, whose species evolved from persistence predators and consequently possessed an almost supernatural ability to detect deception. "Let's begin with the basics, Doctor," Thessarian said, her crystalline vocal structures creating harmonics that most species found soothing. Humans, predictably, seemed immune to the effect. "These modifications to your integumentary system, when did they begin?" "Day 12 of the siege." The human's response carried the precision of someone who'd been keeping careful track. "Primary power coupling failed in Section C7. Backup documentation was in the command center, which had become somewhat inaccessible due to the ongoing kinetic disagreement outside." "Kinetic disagreement," Cortmex repeated, his mandibles clicking in what might have been amusement. "You're referring to our orbital bombardment." "I'm referring to the period when going outside to check reference manuals would have resulted in immediate atmospheric dispersal of my component molecules." The human tilted her head slightly. "So I improvised." Vexahai consulted his notes, though he suspected the conversation was already veering into territory that wouldn't fit neatly into standardized forms. "Improvised how, specifically?" "Heated a maintenance stylus until it achieved the appropriate temperature for precision tissue modification. Then I recorded the coupling specifications directly onto my left shoulder." She indicated an area where what appeared to be random scratches resolved into recognizable technical notation once you understood what you were examining. "Standard engineering documentation protocols, just using available materials." The silence that followed had weight to it, the kind of quiet that accumulated mass and threatened to collapse conversations into uncomfortable singularities. Dr. Thessarian's crystalline structure shifted through several color spectrums before settling on something that might have indicated confusion. "You performed surgery on yourself to avoid a trip to the reference library." "I performed necessary documentation to maintain critical infrastructure during a crisis situation." The correction came with the gentle firmness of someone explaining a complex concept to an intelligent but uninformed student. "The power coupling controlled life support for 47 individuals. Failure would have resulted in atmospheric toxicity within 6 hours." "And you couldn't simply remember the specifications?" Cortmex inquired, his species' eidetic memory making the question seem reasonable rather than condescending. Human neural architecture isn't optimized for perfect technical recall. She said this without apparent embarrassment, the way someone might mention that their vehicle required periodic fuel inputs. But human neural architecture is exceptionally good at associating complex information with physical sensory experiences. Pain provides an excellent mnemonic framework. Vexahai felt that phantom headache intensifying. "You're saying you deliberately caused yourself pain to improve information retention?" "I'm saying I utilized available biological systems to create redundant information storage during a resource-constrained scenario." The human paused, studying their expressions. "Is this concept particularly difficult to understand?" Dr. Thessarian's color spectrum shifted to something approaching alarm. "Most species view unnecessary pain as fundamentally counterproductive to cognitive function." Nothing unnecessary about it. Each modification serves multiple purposes. The human gestured toward her torso without self-consciousness. Primary storage for technical specifications, secondary reinforcement through sensory association, tertiary verification through physical examination of the markings themselves. Multiple purposes, Vexhai echoed. The geometric patterns aren't decorative. They're systematic organization indexes. She traced what looked like intersecting lines across her ribs. Power systems here, environmental controls here, structural engineering specifications here, cross-referenced with severity indicators, deeper cuts for critical systems, shallow ones for secondary functions. Cortmax leaned forward, his predator instincts apparently triggered by something in her demeanor. How many systems did you document this way? All of them. The answer hung in the recycled air, like a challenge waiting for someone brave enough to pick it up. Define all of them, Vexhai said carefully. Every critical system in Settlement Gamma. Primary power distribution, backup generators, water recycling, atmospheric processing, structural support frameworks, emergency protocols. She enumerated each category with the casual precision of someone reading from a checklist. Also your occupation infrastructure after integration. Dr. Thessarian's crystalline structure went completely colorless. Our infrastructure? You required maintenance on your equipment. I was assigned to maintenance duties. I documented everything for efficiency purposes. The human's expression remained neutral, professionally helpful. Standard practice. Standard practice, Cortmax repeated slowly, would be to document this information in conventional data storage systems. Standard practice assumes access to conventional data storage systems. She shrugged, a gesture that caused several of the more intricate scar patterns to shift like living circuitry. Your security protocols prohibited prisoner access to recording devices, so I adapted. Vexhai was beginning to understand why his species had developed multiple arms. The current situation seemed to require more gestures of exasperation than his anatomy could efficiently provide. You're telling us you've been carrying detailed technical specifications for our military equipment carved into your own skin? Among other things, yes. What other things? Dr. Thessarian's voice had climbed into frequency ranges typically associated with emergency medical alerts. The human considered the question with the thoughtful expression of someone organizing a complex inventory. Structural vulnerabilities, maintenance cycles, performance limitations, supply chain dependencies. She paused. Security gaps. The interrogation chamber's climate control system chose that moment to cycle, filling the silence with mechanical humming that sounded remarkably like nervous laughter. Security gaps, Vexhai said. Well, yes. You can't properly maintain something without understanding where it might fail. The human leaned back in her chair with the relaxed posture of someone who'd just solved a particularly challenging technical problem. 3 years of forced maintenance provides considerable insight into systemic weaknesses. Cortmax's mandibles were clicking rapidly now, a sound his species typically made when calculating optimal approach vectors for particularly elusive prey. This information, you've been carrying it the entire time? Where else would I put it? The question sounded genuinely curious, as if she couldn't fathom why they might find this arrangement unusual. You didn't exactly provide filing cabinets. Dr. Thessarian had shifted to a color spectrum that Vexhai's translator couldn't identify, which was probably for the best. We need immediate consultation with xenopsychology, intelligence analysis, and probably theological specialists. Theological? The human asked. Because, Vexhai said slowly, I'm beginning to suspect we're dealing with something that challenges fundamental assumptions about divine justice. The human's scarred features arranged themselves into what might have been genuine amusement. Commander, you haven't seen anything yet. Dr. Quillen possessed 8 legs, 16 eyes, and what was widely regarded as the most comprehensive xenoanthropological database in 3 sectors. Her research facility occupied 17 levels beneath Hegemony Command, where she studied alien cultures with the methodical dedication that her species applied to web construction. When Vex High arrived seeking emergency consultation, she was examining a collection of human artifacts with the focused intensity of someone solving a particularly intricate puzzle. "Ah, Commander, I've been expecting you." Dr. Quillen's compound eyes tracked his movement while her primary manipulators continued organizing data crystals. The detention facility flagged several priority research queries approximately 47 minutes ago. Body modification practices, pain-based learning systems, and what I believe was classified as weaponized scarification. Weaponized might be overstating it, Vex High said, though his conviction wavered as he spoke. We need context for human integumentary modification behaviors: scarification, tattooing, piercing, surgical enhancement. Dr. Quillen activated a holographic display showing images from her archives. Humans have been deliberately altering their skin for approximately 60,000 years across every documented culture. The display cycled through examples that made Vex High's diplomatic training struggle with his xenobiological education. Geometric patterns cut into flesh, pigments inserted beneath skin layers, metal objects permanently embedded in tissue. Each image represented choices that defied rational analysis. But surely these were primitive cultural practices, Vex High suggested hopefully, abandoned as their civilization advanced? On the contrary, Dr. Quillen manipulated the display to show more recent examples. Modern human societies showed increased sophistication in body modification techniques. They developed specialized tools, sterile procedures, artistic traditions. They treated their bodies as canvases for permanent artwork. Artwork. Vex High repeated the word as if it might make more sense the second time. Among other applications. The display shifted to show examples of what appeared to be technical diagrams etched into human skin. Some modifications served practical purposes: geographic coordinates, medical information, personal identification codes. Personal identification? Humans frequently marked themselves to indicate group membership, professional specialization, or individual achievement. Dr. Quillen's tone carried the academic excitement of someone who'd discovered an particularly elegant solution to a complex problem. Military units, technical guilds, religious organizations all used scarification as permanent record-keeping. Vex High studied the images, noting patterns that seemed oddly familiar. Record-keeping. Quite sophisticated, actually. This example shows a human engineer who documented every major project across a 30-year career. The display highlighted intricate patterns covering an elderly human's arms. Each modification represents specific technical achievements, including performance parameters and innovation details. So what we're seeing isn't aberrant behavior. Commander, what you're seeing is perhaps the most traditional human behavior imaginable. Dr. Quillen's manipulators moved through data crystals with increasing excitement. Humans have been using their bodies as information storage devices since before they developed written language. Your prisoner is simply applying ancient practices to modern problems. The implications crystallized with unpleasant clarity. Vex High activated his personal communication device. Security analysis. This is Commander Vex High. I need immediate review of all technical maintenance assignments for human prisoners. Sir? Is there a specific security concern? There's a potential security catastrophe. Vex High looked at the archives displaying thousands of years of human body modification. I need to know every piece of equipment, every system, every classified installation that humans have had maintenance access to. That would be extensive, sir. Integration protocols assigned human technical specialists to most infrastructure maintenance. All of it. Every assignment, every location, every security classification. Vexhai felt something that might have been actual panic, despite his species' evolved resistance to emotional extremes. And I need prisoner medical records for any evidence of self-inflicted modifications. The communication system remained silent for several seconds, before responding with the careful tone reserved for delivering catastrophically bad news. Sir, medical reports indicate approximately 63% of human prisoners show evidence of systematic scarification consistent with technical documentation practices. Dr. Quillen's compound eyes fixed on Vexhai with predatory focus. Commander, exactly how much access to military infrastructure have you provided these humans? All of it. The admission felt like confessing to accidentally detonating a star. Maintenance efficiency ratings indicated human technical specialists achieved performance metrics 17% above galactic averages, because they were documenting everything they touched. Apparently, Dr. Quillen activated additional displays showing human neural architecture studies. Their brains are remarkably adaptive to pattern recognition and systematic information storage. Combined with their apparent immunity to pain-based deterrence, they've essentially turned their bodies into biological hard drives. Biological hard drives containing 3 years of classified technical intelligence on 63% of your prisoner population. Dr. Quillen's voice carried what might have been admiration. Commander, I believe you've encountered something unprecedented in occupation history. Vexhai stared at the archives, at centuries of human body modification practices, at the growing realization that his species had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of their prisoners. They've been conducting intelligence operations using their own skin. More than that, they've been conducting intelligence operations using methods so ancient and culturally embedded that no modern security protocol could possibly account for them. Dr. Quillen manipulated the display to show comparative analysis data. No other species in our database has ever developed such sophisticated biological information storage. What do we do with this intelligence? That depends entirely on what they intend to do with it. Dr. Quillen's manipulators moved through data crystals with renewed urgency. Commander, I recommend immediate consultation with strategic intelligence and possibly theological affairs. Theological affairs again? Because if I'm correct about the implications, you haven't just been housing prisoners. Dr. Quillen's compound eyes reflected, the holographic displays like tiny stars. You've been providing advanced technical training to the most sophisticated biological intelligence network in recorded history. Vexhai felt that phantom headache evolving into something approaching existential crisis. And they've been hiding in plain sight. Not hiding, Commander. Preparing. High Arbiter Kexthran had overseen the integration of 47 worlds during her distinguished career, but she'd never before found herself staring at a prisoner whose skin contained enough classified intelligence to destabilize 3 sectors. The expanded detention facility briefing room now hosted what amounted to an emergency council session, complete with Strategic Intelligence Director Vosshai and a very nervous-looking theological affairs representative. The human sat at the center of this bureaucratic storm, with the serene expression of someone watching a moderately interesting weather pattern. Her detention garments had been replaced with a medical gown that provided clear visibility of the scarification network, transforming her into a living exhibition of strategic intelligence failure. Prisoner Designation 7739, High Arbiter Kexthran began. You are accused of conducting unauthorized intelligence-gathering operations against hegemony assets. I prefer the term comprehensive maintenance documentation, the human replied. But I understand the semantic distinction might seem academic at this point. Strategic Intelligence Director Vosshai leaned forward, his sensor clusters focused with laser intensity. These markings represent detailed schematics of classified military technology, fleet deployment schedules, supply route vulnerabilities, command structure hierarchies, also optimal maintenance intervals, performance specifications, and troubleshooting protocols. The human's tone remained conversational, almost helpful. You'd be surprised how much strategic intelligence emerges from understanding why things break down. 3 years, Vosshai continued, of systematic intelligence collection, encoded into biological storage systems, distributed across multiple human assets. We call it institutional knowledge preservation. High Arbiter Kexthrin felt something approaching admiration, competing with professional horror. You've transformed your entire prisoner population into a distributed intelligence network. Not the entire population, only those with technical aptitude and appropriate pain tolerance. The human rolled her shoulders, causing various scar patterns to shift like active circuitry. Turns out humans have naturally high aptitude for both requirements. Director Vosshai activated a holographic display showing detention facility schematics overlaid with prisoner assignment data. 63% participation rate. Complete technical access across all military installations. Perfect operational security through methods our surveillance couldn't detect. Perfect. Operational security through methods your surveillance couldn't conceptualize, the human corrected gently. Biological information storage predates electronic surveillance by approximately 60,000 years. Evolution provided excellent encryption. The Theological Affairs representative, who'd remained silent throughout the briefing, finally spoke. From a philosophical perspective, this represents unprecedented convergence of ancient methodology with contemporary strategic objectives. From a practical perspective, High Arbiter Kexthran said, this represents the most successful intelligence operation in galactic history. Successful assumes we've accomplished our objectives. The human's scarred features shifted into what might have been anticipation. We've been gathering intelligence for 3 years. The question isn't what we know. It's what we plan to do with what we know. Silence descended with the weight of a collapsing star system. What do you plan to do with what you know? High Arbiter Kexthran asked, though she suspected the answer would require additional theological consultation. Nothing. The response carried such casual finality that several present wondered if their translation systems had malfunctioned. Nothing, Director Vosshai repeated. We don't need to do anything. You're going to do it for us. The human leaned back with the satisfied expression of someone who'd just completed a complex engineering project ahead of schedule. 3 years of forced maintenance taught us something interesting about hegemony psychology. Which is, you can't tolerate systemic inefficiency. It violates fundamental cultural imperatives. The human gestured toward the holographic displays showing facility schematics. Now that you know we possess detailed intelligence about every critical system weakness, you'll be compelled to implement comprehensive security upgrades. High Arbiter Kexthran felt understanding dawn like a particularly unpleasant sunrise. Upgrades that will require technical expertise. Upgrades that will require the most qualified technical specialists available. The human's expression approached genuine warmth. Which would be us. You're suggesting we'll voluntarily provide you with access to even more classified systems. I'm suggesting you have no choice. System security requires immediate comprehensive overhaul. Your own efficiency protocols demand optimal resource utilization. The human traced one of her more intricate scar patterns absently. We're the most qualified technical specialists in the sector. Director Vosshai's sensor clusters shifted through several spectrums before settling on something that might have indicated grudging respect. You've engineered a scenario where our response to your intelligence gathering requires expanded intelligence gathering opportunities. We've engineered a scenario where maintaining security requires providing us with the tools to ensure security. The human paused, considering her words. Eventually, you'll realize that the most efficient approach is simply asking us what we want, rather than trying to contain what you can't comprehend. And what do you want? High Arbiter Kexthran asked. Better working conditions, adequate technical resources, recognition as engineering consultants rather than prisoners. The human shrugged, causing her living technical manual to shift like active programming. Basically, we want you to treat us like the highly qualified professionals we've proven ourselves to be. The Theological Affairs representative was frantically updating his notes, stylus moving with the desperate energy of someone trying to document a theological revolution in real time. This represents unprecedented strategic manipulation through cultural psychology. This represents humans being humans, the prisoner corrected. We solve problems with available resources. For 3 years, the available resources were our own bodies and your technological infrastructure. We improvised. High Arbiter Kexthran stared at the human, at her methodically documented intelligence network, at the growing realization that the hegemony had been outmaneuvered by beings who treated their own skin as filing systems. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the sound of standard occupation protocols dissolving into bureaucratic chaos. The worst part was the growing certainty that this had been inevitable from the moment they'd decided humans were simple enough to manage through conventional deterrence. Prisoner 7739, she said finally. I believe we need to discuss revised detention arrangements. The human smiled with the satisfied expression of someone whose 3-year engineering project had finally achieved optimal functionality. I thought you'd never ask.